Okay, so now we're going to get into indoor environmental quality, and we're going to start with the prereqs, of course, which have to do with minimum indoor air quality standards. And given the fact that humans, especially in the United States, spend about 95% of their time indoors, this is pretty critical. Usually this falls under the backs of the mechanical engineers on the project, so it's really important if you're the sustainability person to be interacting with them on a regular basis. And there's requirements, all kind of requirements for mechanically ventilated spaces. And here ASHRAE 62.1 is pretty critical. And I've always mentioned before that LEED is really a collection of other rating systems or other standards. When you're studying for the LEED AP, not the LEED Green Associate, these kinds of ASHRAE standards become pretty important to know, really memorize. And now we have new standards that LEED has accepted over time. So there's more and more flexibility being built into the system. And there's a separate set of requirements or slightly different ones for naturally ventilated spaces. And again, I always recommend that you go back to your reference guide. The intent here, obviously, is to reduce smoke and secondhand smoke from the environment. It's easy to require in a building, in a LEED building, very hard to enforce. I teach at a university and I have a LEED Gold building, and right outside my front door, what do I find? Lots of kids smoking. And then it becomes tricky for me because, well, I don't want to get beat up, but I have to tell people to stop smoking within 25 feet of the building. And I did it, and I'm brave. Thank you very much. Indoor air quality. So the intent here is, well, the intent is worth 2 points. We want to make sure that people are comfortable. And there's a whole realm of research that shows that when people are comfortable in their indoor environments, they are more productive at work. They are less sick. And overall, they are happier. And a happier employee will produce more work. A happier employee will be happier, forget more work. And again, here, this really falls under the MEP. And you've all been in spaces that actually were not comfortable, or the indoor air quality was not up to standards, and it really is very uncomfortable. And there's lots of ways to think about that. We can look at the entryway systems. What? Well, when we come in and out of buildings, we bring all sorts of toxins and dirt into the atmosphere. We worry about cross-contamination prevention, and we look at how we're filtrating the air. All of these things are really critical in that. And then, of course, ultimately, we'd like to have buildings with operable windows. I was doing a seminar on Friday, and the heat was not working, or the cooling was not working, and we couldn't open the windows. Really not a strategy for resilience, right? And then there's other kinds of requirements for mixed mode. So I would recommend that you see the reference guide for more there. Low emitting materials. This is now considered low hanging fruit. It wasn't always, but now we can find all kinds of products that meet the low emitting material standards for LEED, and it's just requires time in your office to do the research. Once you've done it, you always have it. You don't have to update it. You'll have it in your specifications. I recommend that all of this get put into your specifications so that if there's a problem later, you'll be okay. So option 1 is product category calculations. If some of the materials are not compliant, then you'll have to look at a percentage of those materials that are not compliant to get the total number of points that you would like to get. Okay, construction indoor air quality. Well, we've all been on job sites where we've got indoor air pollution from the way that we built the project, whether it was the way we separated the project or the way that dust got into the HVAC systems. So we want to build a relationship between builder and architect and sustainability person and client, and make sure that the builder is using processes as defined in the specifications that will address the problem. We tend to do a lot of training for our builders. More and more in the 21st century, these points are easy to get as builders have been more than happy to get on board. And there's some pretty detailed requirements that go along with that. Indoor air quality assessment. This has always been a controversial one, is how do you know if you have quality indoor air? Well, you can have an indoor air quality management plan. This is pretty critical, worth 2 points. And one of the things you can do is you can flush out the entire building before the furniture's in, but before people have occupied the building. Really tricky to do. Think about trying to open up a building in August and you're still laying in flooring and now you want to do a flush out. So you can also do, flush out during occupancy, which has more detailed requirements. And finally, you could just do an air test before the project opens up, and you could find out if, in fact, your building meets the standards for the 2 points. Thermal comfort, as you know, is really critical. If people are cold or hot or there's too much humidity, they're not going to perform well. They're not going to be happy, and we would say that's not sustainable. Certainly will impact production. So we want to get thermal controls for individuals so they have more control over their individual environments. They can be happier, healthier, and actually probably use less energy in the long run. How many times have the heating and cooling been on when it wasn't really necessary? ASHRAE 55.1, 55 is the baseline for this, just like 62 was earlier. And there are new standards out there, ISO and CEN standards, that you can use to meet this point. Interior lighting is pretty critical because not only do we want to have the right amount of light, but we want it to be adjustable. And again, all of these strategies, I'll be going into great detail later on in the course. Right now, I'm just trying to give an overview of all of the strategies and how they fit together to form a comprehensive green building rating system. But I will be covering daylight harvesting, all of those kind of great things that are out there for lighting control and user control of lighting. And then we have daylighting, which seems like an obvious sustainability move. We want to get as much daylight into the building. However, we don't want the glare and the heat gain. Daylighting is not just putting a lot of glass on your building, and it requires really simulation and very specific design strategies in order to achieve daylighting at the level that you want to get it into. So later in this course, we'll be covering that in great detail. And then there are different ways that you can meet that, simulations, calculations that you can do to show that you've met that. Views, this seems kind of obvious, but I like it because it gets away from the objective measurements and looks more at the experience of the user. It is geared towards making users happy and more productive because they can see outside, but there's a qualitative aspect to this that is quantified, which I think is kind of critical to see as potential for future subjectively oriented points. But basically, people need to see outside. How often have we designed spaces for users that we know they'll never see the light of day? There's a lack of empathy sometimes amongst us and the facilities managers that are generating the buildings for these people. So you basically need a direct line of sight and clear glass, by the way, of 75% of all the spaces. So pretty much all the offices need to have a line of sight to a window which can view outside. It's great. Lastly, acoustic performance. By the way, this is one of the trickier ones because acoustics is one of the subjects we just don't know a lot about. At least I don't. And typically one of the strategies that we talk about is bringing in an expert in acoustics. Just like I said earlier, you might bring in a daylighting or lighting expert. You certainly might bring in an acoustic expert for this particular one. And there's all kinds of requirements that are pretty specific that I'm not going to get into here. I would recommend that you go see the manual, the LEED reference guide for that. So upcoming videos, I'm going to look up at not indoor environmental quality, but innovation. And again, I always recommend you go back to the reference guide for help. Okay, thanks a lot.